Hello everyone, so this is Chris Montero. Thank you so much for listening to my video. My article and my reading was based in McCarthyism in the Professoriate, a historiographic nightmare. Very interesting era. McCarthyism was a complex event pretty much in the late 40s and mid 1950s where repeated attacks on intellectuals and government employees was taking place. Senator Joseph McCarthy, this is a person who really started the movement. As you can see, it carries his last name. He was a symbol of repeated attacks on professors, known and widely supported for his anti-American views that really got some great recognition, great attention, great public and political attention. And some people call him a master of bullshit. And excuse my French for this one, class, but he really didn't have any evidence to base his arguments on. He uses anti-communist rhetoric as a political tool, and I think, well, in my eyes, I could see this as a fear tactic that he implemented. McCarthyism, the movement, it was so powerful that professors couldn't stop, they couldn't halt the attacks. In the 1950s, they experienced a period of frailty, of powerlessness, and some expert historians affirm that McCarthyism was a national movement. And, communism really just threatened the people's freedom, people's security. And not to compare, but I think it's important to note that Hitler, Adolf Hitler, he also created a mass movement, just like Martin Luther King created a mass movement. So for the mass movement theory, this really goes in line with those kind of tactics that he used, not necessarily based in fear for each of the different scenarios, but it's important to recognize. So this pretty much this report, this article that I read, is a combination of essays and reports that dig into the McCarthy era. So let's reevaluate, shall we, this McCarthy era. So McCarthy had this ability to create havoc with manipulation tactics. And just to give you an example, he announced that 204 communists were working in the State Department in 1950. This was in 1950, and this is what he said publicly. He said, "Could any American rest easily, knowing pro-communists may have been helping shape our foreign policy?" So these are the kind of disruptive tactics that I'm talking about, playing on people's sentiments and their hearts. And he did his homework. This guy, he knew that liberals were afraid of communism in the federal government, and also many scholars and politicians were also suspicious of communist infiltration. So, some really say that McCarthy aided the goals of communism by violating the precepts of democracy. But the question is, with all these accusations, where are the spies? Did he ever bring forward any spies? And the answer is no. Again, the arguments were based on just nothing really, no backbone to it. And this is what happened. He got caught in so many arguments that really didn't have a base of support, and this is what happened with his downfall. All his repeated attacks, very absurd. He actually decided to take on the U.S. Army, and after many wrong arguments, this led to his censure in 1954. Now, the interesting fact here is that there's some reports that say that he actually had great relationships with Joseph and John Kennedy, and this is just important to know that his downfall came in 1954, but he did have tremendous support throughout the landscape, throughout the nation, really. So some of the central issues that we should definitely point out. Starting with higher education, this is controversial, right? The California Oath. UCLA required professors to swear that they were not members of the Communist Party. So basically, there was a loyalty questions here that was taking place. Also in government, McCarthy had a huge role in influence. Federal and state investigations of Anti-Americanism. Some professors refused to actually testify. Others, important to know, some of the conservative professors participated in these investigations and actually added that communists should not be allowed to teach in the nation anywhere in the United States. The person who said that, professor who said that, was Sidney Hook, kind of like one of the most famous that kind of came out and was also supportive of this kinds of investigations. So another huge central issue that happened in this time, academic freedom. I know our text talked a whole lot about it, but we're talking about ideological pressures. We're talking about political expression, censorship of books, civil liberty. All these things were at stake. And some professors and faculty and scholars of that era and today referred to this as the new wave of intolerance. And just a quick example, the University of Washington, they didn't include faculty choice of outside lecturers. So this is an example of the lack of academic freedom. They couldn't even choose who was going to come and speak to their class, regardless of how relevant or how well prepared the speaker was. They didn't have the final say. So again, the huge central issue here was all these accusations based without evidence. And a lot of these really led to some serious sanctions and dismissals on behalf of the professors, or to the professors, I mean. So, and what's worse is that while all of this was taking place, there was very little resistance from university leaders. So we're talking about directors, presidents, administrators. They just kind of swept this whole thing under the rug, and they just wanted to get out of the public eye as fast as possible. They wanted to keep this funding coming. They wanted their ratings to stay the same or maybe go raise even higher. So they were not going to get caught in this whole speculation of, professors in communism. They just pretty much stayed quiet, and the professors really did take a lot of heat because of this era. So, and Richard Hickson, he noted that McCarthy may have distinguished himself in his exceptional disregard for truth. I think that quote is key, really sums it up, that he didn't really care about truth. He just created havoc in one way or another. So to learn a little bit about the context of this article and really what was going on in this time, to give everyone an idea. Well, politically, lots of happenings. We had a growing involvement of government in higher education. Actually, federal government during this time surpassed private foundations in funding. So this is a whole concept of big science is best science, and it really gained control in academic science. So this is politically a huge move as far as what was happening during this time. To give you an example, Robert Oppenheimer, who is well known as the father of the atomic bomb, he was going from this government research all back to the university and going back and forth. A lot of those scholars had a lot to do with the military development and had huge contributions to the national defense. And he was actually, his national security clearance was revoked under some very vague and weird charges without any backing or evidence of his membership and involvement in the Communist Party. So that's just one of the of close to 1,000 examples that were recorded, and we'll talk about numbers later. But social change, this integration piece. A lot of things were happening during this time. You had the introduction of the GI Bill. You had this massive access to higher education. Community colleges started to flourish. So there was a lot of changes in higher education, a lot to keep up with, a lot of innovation, and not all of them were for a good cause or a good purpose. I mean, maybe the purpose was great, but not everything turned out the way it was supposed to. There was just a lot of catching up to do in a way. And from a technological perspective, research funding, it really equals the prestige and leadership of universities. This is what it's all about. If you were inside this research funding and had this funding, your in university was much more likely to be very successful. As far as veterans, I mean, they changed the dynamics of higher education. You had 27, 30-year-old men married with kids, combat trained, and way more mature. You had this question with veterans on how do we integrate them. Athletics was a big part in the football teams and all that. But going quickly into the impact of McCarthyism, looking at the text, McCarthyism's influence was huge. It had tons of intrusion and control in higher education. We already talked about the sustained attacks on intellectuals and professors. And also, we had a series of new standards, a growing number of universities that required loyal oaths. It just started happening at that time. Now, the text also talks about faculty, and just an example, a tenured psychologist, Nevin Sanford, resigned to protest. He was a Berkeley professor, protest versus the imposition of the loyalty oath. So this was kind of like a warning sign, but it just kept on happening. They couldn't pick up that the professors were under this scrutiny. But a lot of degradation, firing, and dismissal of faculty started to happen right after that. Also, the Ford Foundation took a lot of heat. They became a target for Senator McCarthy, and so a very important analysis of that time, Lasserfeld and Thielens, they estimated 990 incidents of attacks on academic freedom. So note that when I say sustained, I mean the attacks. I know that this was not the first time where professors were challenged, but this was the first time where faculty were repeatedly under attack. So looking at some advances in higher education and some connections to recent years, pretty much now, you have the introduction to substantial grants for advanced research. That was huge, and also the returning veterans. The integration piece. I think that this is something that we deal with today. I think that in a lot of campuses they're not very well integrated, and this is an issue that we still could connect it to today. Also, some of the state funding. We talked about land grant universities in the text. Right now, the land grant university in our state is NC State, and I think this is it could be an issue for some people. You have a concentration of power, and I think with power you get prestige, you get a lot of resources. But some could argue, what about us, right? I mean, what about UNCW? I think this is a huge problem that was happening at the time. So now to some pressing questions. I think that one or anyone could argue that professors are really the true reason behind college success. I think personally that they are the voices that shape the minds of students, and if it wasn't for them, leading the way for higher education, I don't think we would be here today. So I'll leave you with two pressing questions in regards to professors. And the first one is, considering the lack of evidence of virtually every single one of the accusations, why didn't students or organizations defend professors from these sustained attacks? Why was that? Also, the last one is, do you think that professors are respected in higher education today? And do they have the autonomy and recognition they deserve? Thanks for listening, guys. I'm looking forward to your responses. I hope that everyone has a great weekend.